Welcome to the Bird Joy podcast. My name is Dexter Patterson.
And I am Jason Hall, and this podcast is for all the bird nerd homies out there that want to find a little bird joy. So welcome.
Welcome. Are you all ready for some bird joy? Because today we have an extra dose of it because we have a special guest joining us today. We have Christian Cooper joining us today on the Bird Joy podcast. Let's go. Christian, welcome. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, guys. Great to be here.
So excited. So excited.
Like, I don't know what to do with myself now.
You can laugh, and you can cry, and then let it all become a part of you.
Yes. Christian, I've seen you a few times over the years. You've come down to Philly and blessed us with your presence and your knowledge and some various forums.
Now I feel like the Pope.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'll be honest. I looked forward to you coming more than I did the Pope. A lot less traffic and more birding. So, yeah. So, for folks that don't know, Christian is a best-selling author, TV host, and an all-around amazing birder. So his show, Extraordinary Birder, if you haven't seen on Disney Plus or Nat Geo, definitely check that out. And, I don't know how much you flex with this, but Emmy Award winner as well, right? Let's make sure we talk about that.
He do some guns too, so he can definitely do some flexing.
I know he looked good. He looked good when I saw the picture and I saw the speech. I was like, I can't believe I know this human being. This is amazing. So, just kudos to you and to everyone that has supported you and your family and otherwise, because you really are setting some really good, I'll say, mile markers for people to follow in terms of their journey, in terms of how they express their desire to be connected with birds and nature, and more importantly, the communities that probably need them the most. So, man, big flowers to you.
Well, thank you so much. And I got to share that Emmy with everybody who worked on the show. So, we all worked really hard on it, and hopefully, it brought some new people into birding.
Absolutely.
Oh, I know it did. I can't tell you how many, even people in my family, people in the birding club that were just kind of just blown away just to see somebody that looked like them on that TV screen, traveling all over the world. And it's just, it was just one of those moments where every week I'm just smiling ear to ear because I'm like, look at that. Look at him traveling all over the freaking, is that a nene? What is going on here?
Well, you can imagine how I felt, because as the stereotypical New Yorker, in that I don't drive. So all of a sudden they're like, oh, let's go here and let's go here and let's go here. And yeah, we'll take you every place you need to go to see the birds. And I'm like, must I?
I'm thinking about this, guys. Today is Sunday, October 13th. This is literally around the time we were in Georgia together a couple years ago. Because it was October.
Oh, yeah. That's right.
And you and a bunch of people, Christian, rallied together to bring just a bunch of us from all over the country together in one place for a few days just to talk about birding and to connect and to network. And, Jason and I, we talk about this. We had been homies on the IG for a while before we met in Georgia at Little St. Simon's Island. And then we ended up being roommates. So we not only get to meet for the first time there, because of the Black Birders Retreat, we started thinking about collaboration and like what that could look like for him and I, his club and my club. And the idea of a podcast came up. So I will just want to say thank you, because not only did you bring us together for the first time in real life, as we sat there that night, the last night that we were on the island, I remember all of us in that barn together. And there was a lot of just brain power being passed around in that building that day. And we just sat in a circle and everybody sharing their thoughts about how we can try to move this birding community forward. And I remember you just saying, I want you all just to connect with at least one person and do something. And after that retreat, Jason and I said, we're going to do something. And I said, how about that something be a podcast? That's literally how the Bird Joy podcast was birthed, was at that retreat. To have you on as our first guest, I'm getting a little choked up because I'm a little emotional about
Keep it together. Keep it together, Dex.
I am. Y'all know me. I am an emotional guy. To literally have you as our first guest, season 2 of our podcast, letting people know that like this joy thing, this joy train is still moving forward. I just want to say thank you. It really does mean a lot to us.
You're giving me way too much credit. I was just one of several people who was trying to get us all together. And you're right. It did make tremendous connections. Huge nod to Wendy Paulson, who gave us the run of the island to do our thing.
Absolutely.
And just some amazing moments. I remember specifically when we were all at that, the sole remaining slave quarters on the island. And we went to that, and
Squash House.
I think even for Wendy, it was eye-opening because, she looked at it, objectively, but here were people for whom it was very real. These were potentially our ancestors. And so I think that shifted what it was like for her, even Wendy, for those who don't know, Wendy Paulson is white. And then there was another moment when we had a beach moment, and I was going to the beach and I was in my swimsuit and I had this book I had been reading about, it was written by the wife of a slave owner on that island who had owned that island, had been part of his holdings. He was like the biggest slave owner in that part of the world, if not the country. And as I'm walking down to the beach, the mosquitoes are eating me alive because I'm just in a swimsuit. And I'm whacking the mosquitoes with the book. And I look down the book and I realize this book about the slaves on that island who might have been my ancestors, because I later found out that my grandmother's side was Georgia. Their people came from Georgia. And it's covered with the blood of someone potentially descended from these slaves. As we go out to the Atlantic Ocean and I'm looking across the Atlantic, which we were brought across, and there's nothing between me and the rest of the ocean, and my brain is just about to explode.
Wow.
So it was wild. Yeah.
That whole trip was absolutely amazing. And we all did a lot of thinking after that, right? And we did, and your continued exposure with your book and your TV show just kind of kept that conversation going, not for us, but for a lot of other people, not just for us, should I say. And I'm wondering, like, you've kind of a few years out now from that moment in 2020, and you've had, from what I can tell on social media and otherwise, some really incredible moments of joy.
What moment do you mean?
Oh, I mean, all of them. I can tell you mine, right? Mine was watching you freak out over a Blackburnian warbler just 100 yards from where that event happened with In Color Birding Club this spring, right? Which I've talked about on the podcast, and getting to witness you who have seen that bird so many times stop all conversation, and you were able to hear it while we all were yapping, walking up the trail. And then it was everybody's reaction to your joy that it just emanated through them immediately. It was like a sunburst, just poof, and everybody was like, "Oh my goodness, Christian is trying to show us his black. This is his favorite bird. He just heard it. We got to run around this corner. Who cares about the black and white warbler? Like, let's go." Like it was wild, right? And I wonder, you have a lot of those moments now where I'm sure like people bring you to help them go birding, help them talk about the accessibility of birding to different communities. Has that become part of a standard part of how you find your joy again since that incident?
Yes and no. And I say no because I never lost my joy from that incident. It's just not possible. And I hear that kind of frequently. People who refer to that incident said, "Oh, I'm so sorry about your trauma." And my reaction is, what trauma? It would take a lot more than that to traumatize me. She just doesn't wield that kind of power. And, maybe it's just the thick skin we develop as people of color going through a world that was not imagined or built for us, but we're reimagining it and rebuilding it. But nonetheless, you go through that world with a fairly thick skin when you put your arm out and the cab doesn't stop, and, someone's following you through the supermarket, but not anybody else. You can't get yourself turned into a knot every single time those things happen because you won't make it through the day, let alone a year, let alone life. So, maybe it's that kind of thick skin that it didn't, I can't say it just rolled off me. I mean, that was pretty dramatic, and I was pretty rattled for, certainly the rest of the morning and probably most of the rest of the day. But no, I wasn't traumatized. And it's funny how often I've been back to that spot since, and I don't even realize it because I don't care. That spot has so awesome. it has so many more memories attached to it, like a Blackburnian warbler I saw there, or the mourning warbler from 10 years ago that came out that very spot and put on a display for everybody to see for a week. That kind of stuff is leaves much more of an impression.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned not love in a sense of like it's a good thing, but I love that you brought it up, this sense of us as Black men having to have thick skin, just living our lives. Whereas it's like you've gone through so much, in your life, Christian, growing up as a gay Black man in America. I'm sure you've dealt with tons of hate, probably more hate than that lady gave you in the park that day. To be honest, who knows? There's so many levels to it. And you mentioned the thick skin. But what I find in those thick skin moments is birding helps me keep my joy. Yes. Right? Where it's just like it gets me back on track, where I say, you know what, as crappy as that morning, like you said, maybe my morning sucked or the rest of that day sucked, but I got back to it because I went back to that spot because that mourning warbler, that Blackburnian warbler. Can you just talk a little bit about how birding helps you deal with the world as a whole and helps keep you focused on joy and the good things in your life?
Sure, 100%. I talk about it in my book, because let's take that moment right after it was all over and we've gone our separate ways, and I'm like I said, I was rattled and I'm thinking, oh, are the cops going to roll up on me or what's going to happen? What happened was I decided quite consciously that I'm going to go back to birding because that's what I came here for. And as I'm walking through the park is working its magic. I'm amongst the green leaves. The sunlight is gorgeous. There's American redstarts singing. Find them. They're flashing their orange against the black in their tails. And I'm seeing these things as I'm walking towards the park exit because I was on my way out anyway. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I'm calming down now. My blood pressure is going somewhere south of stroke inducing. And that's been true sort of for my whole life, is that, as you said, growing up Black and queer in the all white world of birding and in the very conservative environment of Long Island back in the 70s. Yeah, there was a lot to feel awful about. But when I was birding, I forgot about that, at least for a little while. Your focus has to be outside yourself or you're not going to see birds. So, I'm in nature. Nature's working its magic. I'm being super attentive because it's not just like a walk. You're not just walking. You're out there and you've got to be putting yourself out amongst everything around you. If you want to see the birds, you've got to be listening. You got to be looking for a particular kind of motion. And as you do that, you're not focused on you. You're not focused on, oh God, I'm a queer kid. My life is over. You're not focused on, oh my God, why haven't I ever run into any other Black people birding? None of that. Not for a little while anyway. Yeah. And so that is whatever. And, those were my specific issues when I was a kid. Whatever is weighing down on your mind for a little while, it goes away. And you get to recognize that there's a larger world around you that you are a part of and that you get to enjoy. And you're in the process of enjoying it in that moment. And that's really, that's incredibly healing. I mean, Tama Watts talks a lot about the healing power of nature, and she is 1000% correct. It is incredibly healing. And that's why I wish more Black people did it, because we need the healing. After going through the days of being bulletproof so that nothing gets through our thick skin, you need to mend a little bit. And particularly birding, because birds are the ultimate symbol of freedom. And what people with our history need birds and need that symbol of freedom more than us.
I feel like we're at church right now.
Man, that was beautiful because
get myself together. That is so well put, and I gotta encourage people, because we didn't mention it yet. But if you want to learn more about that, Christian's book, Better Living Through Birding: Notes from a Black Man in the Natural World. It's a best-selling book. Trust me, and I gotta put a plug in. If you get the audio version, it's even better because you hear his voice and you can get some of the inflection. It's absolutely tremendous.
I wanted Morgan Freeman, but he was on
I gotta say, man, you did a great job. I ate that book up. I literally, if I was anywhere where I didn't have to listen to another human being, my AirPods were in, and I was, what's next? What's going on? I think the cool part is it gives everybody else the ability to see how their own lives and structure can also be comparable in terms of these are my formidable years. This is when I started to like nature. This is what things that I've gone through, my own traumas, my relationship with my family. And then they take their own inventory and be like, oh yeah, like it really helped me say like, oh man, what I went through when I was 8, watching my parents get divorced, violence in my household, and all this other stuff. And I'm outside looking at birds. I'm in Jackson, Mississippi, pissed off because I have to live in Jackson, Mississippi when I came from California and I missed my mother. And I'm outside looking at thousands of what I think were red-winged blackbirds at the time roosting in this massive bamboo patch that we had in our backyard, right? And I say, man, we are not devoid of these experiences, right? Christian is showing us how his played a role in his life, and we can do ours. And I wonder, now that you are one of the big faces of birding, do you find those? Yeah, you are. Do you find those smaller moments still to kind of connect with it? Do you not get enough of them where you can, is somebody always pulling you to come do an event and fly across the country?
People are pulling, and that's okay. I'll let myself be pulled, Sure. And if I don't want to let myself be pulled, I will, politely decline. But the moments, I don't know, maybe because I've been birding for a long time, the moments come when they come. I'm not constantly out there birding. It's not all the time for me. Well, it is, but it isn't. What do I mean? What do I mean by that? For example, I will frequently choose to go to the gym first thing in the morning because that's when the gym is most empty and I can get my workout done rather than go birding. But you know what? I got to walk through this park on the way to the gym. And as I'm walking through the park, my ears are sorting and I'm like, oh, the white-throated sparrows have arrived and the golden-crowned kinglets, because I can hear them as I'm walking through the park. And then I'm like, oh, I got to make a note to come back. The other day, I was, after a run, I was doing planks because it takes a lot when you're over 60 to hold everything together. So I'm like, I got to be good about doing my planks. So I'm doing planks up on the roof and I hear this little pip and I'm like, okay, that was not a warbler chip. I'm like, but it wasn't like one of the house sparrows or the house finches. My head said, pay attention. And I stopped the plank and I looked up and there on my roof, my little rooftop in the middle of Manhattan was an eastern phoebe. And I was like,
we were just talking about.
I was so excited. I was like, birding, it never stops. And yet at the same time, I'm not necessarily making a special point of it at any time. Just today, I don't even know what I was doing, but I was down here in the apartment and through the window, I heard, and I'm like, Raven! It was too distant for me to get at it. So I knew this one I had to let go, but there have been previous times because we do get them every once in a blue moon here in Manhattan in my neighborhood. And the last one that came, I heard it as I was working in my apartment and I ran upstairs and I grabbed my binoculars and I knocked over a glass of water and it shattered all over the floor and I did not care. And I ran upstairs and I got that right.
Love it.
Just pay attention. My grandfather would always say that. So to hear you say that, those are wise words. Because it's amazing what we see when we simply just pay attention. And you don't have to have your binoculars or a camera or anything in those moments when you're paying attention. We're still birding. Birding.
I highly recommend anybody to develop their ear because your ears won't turn off, so your ears will give you red flags all the time, like pay attention. So, yeah. But so to come back to your question, Jason, do I still find time for those moments? And 1,000%, they come whenever they come at unexpected times. And they're in many ways the most glorious. Like finding an eastern phoebe upstairs in my roof garden was just like, oh, I'm so happy. I went up there the other day and there was a song sparrow. And, song sparrows, they're common. But this was a migrant who was stopping over in my roof garden where I deliberately plant native plants and let the wildflowers go to seed rather than get it. So it looks ugly. But this bird was refueling on the seeds that I'd let the wildflowers turn into. And I was like, yes, proof of concept, migrating song sparrow refueling. I've helped this bird get south, so it's just, you get joy in all kinds of ways from birding.
That's absolutely amazing. And I'm glad you put it that way, just to remind people that like sometimes you can't let these moments come to you, right? You don't have to force it. And like Dexter said, as long as you're paying attention, right, they will find you. And we were just having a conversation around a historic house here in Philly that grew in a little meadow that they're letting the flowers go to seed and the people that work there never saw the birds. and we showed them an eastern phoebe and the white-throated sparrows, and they're like, why are they here? And I'm like, because you have this meadow with all these flowers and they're starting to go to seed, and they left all the leaves down, and the towhees are ripping up the leaves and looking for bugs, and like their minds were blown that they could actually contribute that way. And it's so great to hear that you still get that kind of joy from your efforts on your rooftop, right in the middle of doing planks, which I don't do. I don't do planks. If you've ever seen me, I don't do planks. And I would gladly stop planks to go birding. I would gladly stop anything to go birding. So.
Planks and birding. Planks, birding.
Yeah. No. Mm-mm.
And I will say I went back to my planks after the Phoebe flew away.
Good for you. You're setting the example for all of us.
Yeah, he is. You mentioned you're mentioning how you go to a certain spot and you can remember a bird. Mm-hmm. 10 years ago, I got the mourning warbler here. Or,
1,000%.
Jason and I were having conversations where I'll go to places and I will remember where I've seen this bird or that bird. And I will spend more time in those spots at those locations because of those memories.
Well, but sometimes
and because
that makes
of
sense.
Those stories, those are usually the stories that I end up telling. And when I think about you becoming an Emmy award-winning TV personality and a best-selling author, it makes me think as a communicator, as somebody that teaches students about visual storytelling and storytelling as a whole. Did you always see the connection between storytelling and birding, or did that just kind of evolve naturally for you?
I think it's a confluence of two of my interests. So I can't say that it necessarily is something that will happen for anyone. But for me, because storytelling is in my blood and birding is in my blood, it was inevitable that I would sort of commingle the two. Whether that's in the comic book I wrote after, quote unquote, the incident, or whether it's in the way I wrote my memoir, because I will confess that I don't read memoir. So I really had no idea, how do people put together a memoir? And finally, what I just did was I took my own approach in that I used the storytelling techniques I learned working in comics at Marvel and use those to sort of shape the narrative, and give a little impetus to each chapter. It's harder because, you can't make things up like you do with the comic book. It's, what happened is what happened. But the way you tell it and the way you shape the story can make some things more prominent or more interesting. And that's what I was trying to do, when I wrote my book. So I don't think there's necessarily an inherent connection between storytelling and birding, but there was for me.
Love it.
Yeah, I think you actually did a good job of linking those two things together for a lot of us. That's another example that your book and your show put out there in the world. And I got to say, I wouldn't be mad if you wrote a comic around conservation superheroes for birding, or a comic where the superheroes were birds. I wouldn't be mad at it.
Biodiversity man.
Whatever you want to call it. Like, it can be like a really bad take on Captain America, but for birds. I don't know. Or Captain, what was it? Captain Planet. Captain Planet. Yeah, remember? I still remember the theme song in my head. Yeah, that's absolutely amazing. And I wonder when you look back at the book and the TV show, and I know the moments that impacted me the most in both of those. But is there something that when you think back on putting those things together and the conversations you've had about them, are there any things that always come to the top of mind, like the stories that, like, if you want someone to get the best impression from you of those things? Is there a particular story or episode or moment that you'd want them to know about?
Yeah, I would say, because there were a lot of really, for me, doing it, amazing moments putting the show together. And I hope that came through in the show. There was a moment in Hawaii where I, who pride myself on my Vulcan heritage, my ability to keep my emotions under tight control. And I actually choked up filming a scene in Hawaii where the nenes were being released and rejoining the flock. And there was just something so magical about that moment. Or when I was on top of the George Washington Bridge, literally on top of the George Washington Bridge. And the peregrine falcon female is zooming through the superstructure of the bridge, screaming her head off because we're in her realm and she's not having it. And it was mind blowing. So, there's moments like this, like that, like those. But I think the one chapter that was most significant to me was going to Alabama. And the reason I say that is because, I mentioned that some of my people came from Georgia. I only found that out fairly recently. That was my dad's mother's family was Georgia. But what we had known for quite some time is that my dad's father's side of the family, they all came from Alabama. And, I'm a Northern boy for several generations now. Just a New Yorker. And the idea of, going down to the deep South, my reaction was always like, my people left there for a reason. So I was always like, really trepidatious about going down there. Maybe wrongly, maybe for good reasons. But the bottom line is I had the opportunity to go down there in the tender welcoming arms of Alabama Audubon. And I thought, you know what? I'm not going to have a better chance to actually see where my people came from. So I went down, and it was such an interesting revelatory experience where birds and civil rights history and family history all came together and collided in surprising and interesting ways that I really wanted to recreate that experience for the show. And that's what we did with the Alabama episode. So if there was one thing I had to pick out as a standout, I would say it would be that Alabama episode.
Yeah, and that episode is constantly on my mind too, in terms of planning a trip down there to get onto the Joe Farm and hang out with the homies down there. Because when I left the South, the only reasons I would go back were from my family, just incredibly beautiful family down there in Mississippi. And, I didn't do a lot of birding when I was down there as a kid, other than like some little exploring in my backyard. So I almost kind of want to go and repurpose myself to that cause. That's really what that episode did for me, is like, hey, I can, I birded down there a little bit. I went for my grandmother's funeral services, and had a really sweet moment down there, but it was still kind of like I was in the middle of a forest looking at a northern parula, and I was like, still started to feel like, hey, maybe I shouldn't be here by myself. But that's why I kind of want to go down with the homies, right? I want to be with others that understand that perspective. And I think that's a lot of what your episode brought through, is like, you won't be by yourself, right? If you find the right community down there. And
that is exactly one reason why I went down in the tender welcoming arms of Alabama Audubon when I went down the first time. Yeah. So
that's awesome.
Yeah. I love that you bring up Alabama and your family history, and Jason's thinking about, his family in Mississippi. I have family in Mississippi and Memphis and Tennessee down south. And I didn't do a ton of birding down south either as a kid. But now when I go south, I get really excited to go birding. So it's so cool to kind of see it come full circle. And when I start thinking about you, Christian, and we talked about the impact you've had on us, you're a role model for a lot of underrepresented communities in the outdoors. How does it feel to inspire like that new generation of diverse birders? Because after that incident, Jason and I started clubs, and people all over the country started doing things like telling people we out here, like really kind of broadcasting to the world, like, hey, we exist. And if you see us in the woods, don't look at us funny. We belong here. This is our happy place. We're just birding. And you mentioned you were just birding. So you wanted to get back to birding. How does it feel to know that, that moment that did shake you up, how does it feel to know that moment led to so much in our community when we're thinking about birding?
It's overwhelming. Every once in a while, I'm like, really? I remember when Jason told me, I started in color birding, when I'd gone to Philly, and he said, and we had a moment together where he was walking me back to give me a ride in his car. And he said, I started in color birding because of you and what happened with the incident. I'm like, wait, what? Are you serious? It always catches me aback. And I'm thrilled that all of this has come out of what potentially was so negative. So I'm excited about that. It is, like I said, a little overwhelming. I'm like, okay, you get that I'm just a birder, right? But on the other hand, I also, recognize that there's a certain responsibility on me now that maybe there wasn't before. And I just try to live up to it as best I can.
We appreciate you for that. We really do.
Yeah, certainly do. But I hope you keep getting super famous for various reasons. So I'm gonna continue to talk you up regardless.
Well, I will say there was one really interesting thing that happened just yesterday. I was walking down my own block, and there was a guy walking towards me. And, it was a strongly built, burly guy, but he had on this T-shirt that was like a unicorn's head with a rainbow shooting out the back. Which is, if you have any familiarity with sort of iconography, that's like surefire sign of like a queer person's waving their queer flag. And so I just smiled and I said, I like your shirt. And he smiled back and he said, I like your work. And I was like, wait, what?
Wow. I love it.
I
like your
man.
work.
Yeah. So that was really nice. That was really
Yeah, somebody made you blush. Somebody made you blush out there. Happens to me sometimes too. And I'd be like, no, I'm just a birder.
Oh, shucks.
Yeah.
Shucks.
But that sounds like, to me, that sounds like you are getting this return on investment in these small moments that also contribute to your joy, right? Like, I'm sure there were people that knew who you were before the incident that you influenced. I know there were children that you took out regularly every year. I know there were bird clubs you influenced. You're with the New York City Audubon or New York City Bird Alliance now. And so that's got to be cool to get those little tokens of joy, just kind of unplanned, and people are kind of just reaffirming for you that like the way you're approaching it, and your sister, kudos to your sister for making you put the story out there when it first happened.
Well, she's the one who made it go wide. She's the one who put it on Black Twitter. She was like,
which was a very powerful place before Elon Musk bought it.
Exactly.
So I would say that's got to be now a new way for you to fill up your cup, which is something we talk about when we go birding, is that when we're done, we are on fire. We're so full of love and joy, and like that's got to feel great for you. It's
100% true. It feels wonderful. There's one downside, which is now I can't go out looking like a schlep. I can't like just throw on whatever and have my hair be all messy, because I'm like, God knows if someone's going to recognize me. And,
can snap a picture, throw it on Instagram.
Exactly.
You know,
can we get a celebrity, get a selfie together? You know.
Nah, every time I see Christian, I'm like, man, I got to go back to the gym. I gotta get my life together. So it gives me great joy to see that like people recognize your work. And one thing we wanted to talk about here today was the bird names for birds controversy, right? Just to kind of pivot a little bit. Sure. And you recently have given some talks, and one of them was actually recorded. I think is at the San Diego Audubon.
Well, now they're San Diego Bird Alliance.
San Diego Bird Alliance. Kudos.
You're right. They were San Diego Audubon back then, and yes, this was at the San Diego Bird Festival. Yes.
Yeah, and if folks don't know, if you haven't heard in previous episodes, right, the American Ornithological Society made a decision to remove all honorific names from birds, in particular because a lot of them are named after pretty racist and awful people, at least in the history of North America and the United States. And they decided to remove all the names because who wants to be in the business of trying to figure out who was more or less racist or more or less bad? That's not what a birding organization needs to do. There are a lot of folks that agree with that decision. There is a smaller group of folks that don't. And you gave an interesting talk at San Diego Bird Alliance around those 12 reasons that people do that. And you had just really great rebuttals to all of them that kind of, I think, spurs some conversation. Have you number one, have you gotten a lot of pushback on that from anyone? Or is there any one particular point that you made that people seem to take issue with the most at all?
I haven't gotten a lot of pushback. What I tend to get is, for example, when I gave a modified version of that speech at the just like a week ago at the American Ornithological Society's annual meeting, the response was frankly a little bit flabbergasting. People were coming up to me afterwards, including a couple who said, "Oh, I was on one side of the issue, but by the time you got to point number 6, you'd flip me." I was like,
I love that. Great. I love that.
Moving the needle.
That's the hope. That's the hope, is that, with all of us, with what we're doing, we can move the needle. So the one that I think of those 12 things I've heard as why we should not change the bird names, the one that always irritates me the most, and I know people don't say it to be irritating, but when people say, well, it politicizes birding. And I'm like, oh, because what it indicates is their blinders, that they think that this isn't already politicized and has been politicized for decades, if not centuries. And the example I used at the American Ornithological Society is like something like Star Trek. I'm a nerd. I'll find any excuse to bring up Star Trek. Where, they were deliberately trying to be inclusive. They had Uhura, a black woman, as a bridge officer. They had Sulu, an Asian guy. They even had a Russian on the crew, and Mr. Chekhov. So they were trying to be inclusive. And then you look at all the planets they visited, and, they meet the Vulcans, the Romulans, the Telosians, the list goes on, and every single one of them is white. And this is from a show that was trying to be inclusive and diverse. And they had this blind spot. To them, default was, Caucasian throughout the galaxy, let alone the fact that Caucasian isn't the default on this planet even. And so that is the same kind of mentality that I think is operating when people say to me, well, it politicizes birding. And I'm like, dude, it's been political the whole time and you just didn't see it. It wasn't on your radar because it wasn't something that you were sensitive to. And I say that because all of us have those blind spots. It's not, just any one type of person. I watched Star Trek for years before I realized, wait, why is everybody white throughout the galaxy? It took me years to notice that. So that's what irritates me the most. And, the response is, look, the naming happened during the 1800s when, a bunch of European settlers were expanding west. They had this idea of manifest destiny. They were pushing the Native Americans out. They were keeping the black people as slaves down south. And it just, all of that is part of what happened as they were naming things after their heroes. So there's a political element in there, whether you like it or not. And it's already there. So by getting rid of these names, we're taking the politics out. We're not injecting it in. It's already been political the whole time. So,
absolutely. And you can, people, I was listening to another podcast the other day around the Endangered Species Act and how it's there's a group of people fighting to delist the grizzly bear, right? Because its numbers have rebounded and there's a fight happening in the courts and everything goes back to these decisions to put the Endangered Species Act in the 70s. And you realize that was a political move and it had good benefit, right? And so people sometimes can't link up the fact that the things that they enjoy out there in nature right now, some of them are there because of politics. And some of them can still be there for communities that are underserved because of politics, right? Because we speak up and we kind of, move things as a community. And I found all 12 reasons amazing. And we're going to link in the show notes your talk at San Diego Bird Alliance so people can go see that because it was absolutely phenomenal. But do you feel like things are moving in the right direction at this point with that conversation overall? Yeah,
for sure. I think I realize that what it requires is for all of us to let go of our anger. And I say that because when I first started writing, these responses, I was furious because I had just read what someone had posted online. And it wasn't so much that they disagreed. It was the way they said it that was so dismissive and so arrogant. And I was so furious that I actually made myself late by an hour after dawn to birding while I was in Trinidad and Tobago. So I was in a tropical spot to see all these amazing birds. And I was so fed up that I spent an extra hour right at dawn writing up my answers. And it kind of, so the responses kind of grew out of that. And I have to let go of that anger because I realize now looking back at it, part of the anger of a lot of people at the bird names decision was that they felt like they had been treated high-handedly with arrogance, that their thoughts had not been considered. And I could see where that would make people, get their back up, make them resistant, rather than looking at things dispassionately. So I think all of us have to sort of let go of our anger around the issue and just sort of recognize that we may be coming from different places, but we may be able to find our way to accepting these new names together. And hopefully we can reach that point. It seems to be heading in that direction. And I know the AOS is committed to continuing this. They're going to do it slowly and they're going to be inclusive in how they determine the new names. And the part I love is everyone's excited about the new names. When I'm out in the field and, even people are like, oh yeah, they're changing the names. What are they going to call the Cooper's Hawk? Well, I don't know. We could call it this or we could call it this. And they get excited. And that's what we need is people excited and people engaged. So
what we're going to call the Wilson's Warbler. That's what I want to know.
Someone suggested the toupee warbler, which I think is awesome. I think it's awesome. And then what was another one? Oh, for the Blackburnian warbler, someone suggested the flamboyant warbler, which I think is also awesome.
I like that one.
There's already a flame-throated warbler in Central America, so calling it the fire-throated warbler might lead to some possible confusion, but calling it the flamboyant warbler, I think is just fabulous.
I think that would be fantastic. That would be absolutely amazing.
I was just thinking, You mentioned that these conversations are positive and you see things going in the right direction. What are your hopes for the birding community in the next 5 to 10 years?
That we really capitalize on the surge of interest after, the height of COVID, because it did bring out a whole new crop of birders. And what we need to do is engage them and others, particularly in communities that have not been well represented in birding before, the Black community, the Latino community, etc., because we need all hands on deck. In my lifetime, I've been birding now for half a century. And in that time, in my lifetime, we have lost a third of our birds. And we feel it, when we're out there, we see the fewer numbers during migration, and it's depressing. But the good news is that we can reverse it. We can not only stop the decline, we can bring the birds back, but only if we have commitment and as many people as possible doing the work. So that's why I say, let's capitalize on the COVID surge. Let's get more people involved, and let's move them from just passively birding to a true conservation point in their evolution, which I think is a natural evolution for all of us. Once we start birding, you can't help but go from being a birder to being a conservationist. So,
yeah, is it probably a pretty good through line there to do that? And there's a lot of different flavors you can do, or different things you can try to make that connection in your own community, right? You don't have to be going to school for a PhD and doing your summers at the Powder Mill Nature Reserve in order to influential on conservation, right? And I think that's a really big lesson we try to teach with our bird clubs, that this is stuff you can make part of your life the same way you make using less plastics part of your life, planting natives part of your life, maybe not driving as much and polluting as much, is really right there at our fingertips as long as we're given the opportunity.
One of the ones I did was I cut way down on eating beef. I used to eat a lot of beef, buy it, cook it and all that. Now I don't buy it to cook at home, and I will, occasionally have it out, in a restaurant or something like that. And the people may say, beef, what does that matter to birds? Well, because they're chopping down rainforests in Central and South America and the Amazon to make cheap grazing land for cattle to feed our desire for cheap beef. And when I found that out, I'm like, as someone who loves the birds, I can't be supporting this. I can't be letting my actions fuel this deforestation that's going to get rid of the birds I love so much. So, I just really reduced how much beef I eat.
That goes to the conversation that we always have about when people start to pay attention, they start to care. Mm-hmm. And then when you start to care, that's when you start to, hey, I'm going to do Christmas bird count. I'm going to set up an Eastern bluebird box. I'm going to do bald eagle nest monitoring. I'm going to go visit a local bird bander and learn about bird banding. And so it kind of opens up, as we say, those windows to the wonder, to conservation when you start to care and pay attention to the birds.
Yep. Yeah. And I'm glad you mentioned planting natives, Jason, because that's a big thing I'm into. I talked about my roof garden, and I plant almost entirely natives up there. Let them go to seed. There's a thing called Homegrown National Park. I don't know if you guys have talked about it on your show, but it's free. It's started by Doug Tallamy, and it's a way for all of us to do our little bit to, instead of waiting for the government to create a park. It's like, you'll be waiting until you're dead. But we can do it. We can do it on our own, collectively.
He did bring that up last season.
And I'll be honest, I planted way too much milkweed. I look at it now, and it is massive. And I realized I was only supposed to put a couple in per foot, and I just kind of sprinkled them like salt all over my soil bed there in my flower garden. I'm going to leave them there till they get used right as best possible, before the winter. But I went a little hard on the milkweed because I met some cool homies that were telling me like, hey, I have a little yard, but I have enough space to put native plants along the back. Another good one that people is also beneficial for me is bird-friendly coffee. Like, having coffee that is grown in the shade where they're not cutting down trees. If you just Google bird-friendly coffee, you can find some reputable organizations that can help you with that. Let me ask, because we are into a deep conversation here. Don't want to keep you all afternoon, but are there any projects or anything you're excited about that are coming up, or any particular causes that you are maybe really focused on right now that you want the folks to know about?
I am focused like a laser on November 5th. And I will be working hard to see that the candidate I favor will be elected. And I will let you guess who that is. And then also, as far as projects, I have a kids book coming out in February, which focuses on New York City's owls, celebrity owls, because these owls show up in New York City. So yeah, that'll be kind of fun.
We got some Flacco action in there.
And Flacco is in there.
All right, Flacco. Oh, that's awesome.
Flacco, of course, was not a native bird, but you know what? He turned a lot of people on to the bird, which is amazing. And so it's not just about Flacco. It's also about some of the native owls that have shown up in Central Park, like barred owls, great horned owls.
The snowy owl. Yo, Christian, I saw a video of a snowy owl taking a rat down in one gulp. It was on a tennis court in Central Park. That was the wildest thing I've seen. And people were like, this is not real. This is AI. I'm like, guys, first of all, it's real. You don't need Harry Potter. Second of all, if you knew how these owls hunted sea ducks on the Jersey and New York coastlines, you would realize that they are monsters. And them taking down a New York rat was one of the coolest. I don't know why it felt like some sort of poetic justice. I don't know, but it was so cool watching nature say, okay, you're going to give me this park to live in for the winter. I'm going to do my part, So yeah, that book is going to be awesome.
What was unreal was the fact that there was a snowy owl in Central Park to begin with, because they don't do forested places. They do open expanses like airfields and beaches and, when they're on their breeding grounds, the tundra. So the fact that one showed up in Central Park is just astonishing. But there it was,
And I love that the new book is geared at kids. We talk about it. If you can see it, you can be it. So a kid's book, kids can connect not only to the owls, which, Jason, we've talked about this too. What a better way to get people excited than an owl. Once they see an owl, it's just, I always say you'll never be the same. You have a stare down with any owl, you'll never be the same. So now you're paying attention. Now you care. So the fact that you're targeting kids, I love that, because the earlier, the better. I always wish, I said, I always liked birds, even when I was a kid, but I never gave them the attention they deserve. Books like yours will get kids to pay attention and care about them earlier.
Well, the thing that always astonishes me is that owls are like ambassadors from another realm somehow, they can't help but seem otherworldly. And nobody thinks, everybody knows that owls are out there, but people don't usually see them. So when they actually see one, they're like, this otherworldly being exists in the same space as I do. And that's the reaction we want.
And just so folks know, the book is called here. It's called The Urban Owls, right?
Yes, exactly.
And it's called How Flacco and Friends Made the City Their Home, released on February 18th next year, it looks like. You can certainly pre-order that from the publisher, and we'll put links in. That is going to be amazing. It looks awesome. And so, being able to talk about that story and that, if you see it, you can be it, and have that book coming out as the last question. I'm going to see some new birders next weekend. What advice would you want me to give them to find their joy and purpose through birding?
New birders?
Yeah, new birders.
Binocular skills. Number one, get them, find it with your naked eye, keep your eye on the bird, bring the binoculars to your eyes. They got to master that to really get drawn in, that's the first. But other than that, I would say it's just, don't feel intimidated. I see this a number of times when I've gone to speak to folks, and I say, how many of you are birders? And certain hands go up. I say, how many of you have an interest in birds and, make a point of going out to see them? And a separate set of hands go up. And I'm like, guess what? You're birders. So, don't let anybody, because we all started at some beginner point where we, didn't know our butts from our whatevers, where we were still learning the birds. And that's actually the most fun part of it. That's when it's really glorious, when everything is new. A special tip to the new birders. We old school birders who've been around the block for 1,000 years, we seek you out because we get to, through your eyes, feel that first time joy all over again every once in a while. Nothing gives me a bigger thrill than taking someone who hasn't seen a Blackburnian warbler before, and I'll listen, find one, get them on it, and then I wait. And then Oh my God. Yes. Yes. And I get that thrill again. So tell the beginning birders they're in for the ride of their life. This is the best moment to be birding. This is when they're going to get so much joy, and don't let anybody intimidate them or turn them away from it, because they're going to have so much fun.
Christian, this has been so fun. Thank you for stopping by and chatting with Jason and I just to talk about bird joy. And I think you showed at so many different levels why that bird joy is so important. And even in those moments in our life where life starts lifing, get back to the birds. Get back to the birds, because they will give us, even if it's a brief one, a respite from all the craziness that happens around all of us all the time. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on the Bird Joy podcast. We hope you enjoyed exploring the world of birding with us and Christian Cooper today. Shout out to all my bird nerds in Wisconsin. Make sure you check out the BIPOC Birding Club website. We are at bipocbirdingclub.org.
Yes. And shout out to the homies here in Philly. You can find us at incolorbirding.org. And I want to give a shout out to the NYC Bird Alliance, nycbirdalliance.org, as I'm sure we will have some homies up in New York listening to this podcast. So please get involved. Go out and find your bird joy.
Go grab Christian's book if you haven't already, Better Living Through Birding, Notes from a Black Man in the Natural World. Like we said, we will have links to all this good stuff in our show notes. Today has been jam-packed. So please share, subscribe, shout out the podcast to all your fellow birders, and help us spread a little bird joy.
Thank you so much, guys. It's been a pleasure to be here.